Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
If you've listened to Boise State Public Radio over the years, you've probably heard about Giving Tuesday. Again, this year, you can help spread the word about your favorite nonprofit organization. Visit boisestatepublicradio.org by Tuesday, December 2nd, to nominate a local nonprofit to potentially receive $1,000 in on-air messaging. You can help give back to those who give so much to the communities of Idaho with Boise State Public Radio.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Something fairly unusual happened at the State House recently. Lawmakers on Idaho's Budget Committee, known as JFAC, got a report saying the State Board of Education misspent nearly $2 million. And this wasn't just any money. It was money lawmakers had set aside to fix Idaho's troubled K-12 data system, which is known as Idaho System for Educational Excellence, or ISEE. Now, if you haven't heard of ISEE, don't worry about it. Most people haven't. It is the system that quietly collects data on hundreds of thousands of Idaho students. And the system, well, it's out of date, and replacing it has been a big priority for years. But now the project is basically on pause after federal officials pulled back major funding. And this report about how the State Board of Education used that money is now raising questions about oversight and transparency and what happens next. Kevin Richard, who is the senior reporter with Idaho Education News, has been following this story from the start, and he's joining us now to help us make sense of all of this. Kevin, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Gemma.
Okay, so Kevin, start by walking us through what legislative budget writers heard in November. What exactly did the new report reveal about this $1.8 million that was apparently misspent?
Yeah, the number was a new thing for me, and I think it was a new thing for members of the Budget Committee. This was a report that was compiled by Legislative Services Office, that's legislative staff, completed this audit, and they found that the State Board had taken $1.8 million that was supposed to go into IC, into upgrading this school data system, and used it for other projects that were outside of the scope of what the budget bill that the legislature passed. It was outside of the scope of what the budget law called for spending.
Okay, so the State Board actually used this money, though, Kevin, for other approved programs, things like dyslexia resources, STEM initiatives, even, I think, math remediation. So why does that still constitute misspending under the legislature's rules?
It gets a little bit complicated, and the problem that the State Board seemed to run into was in 1 year. It was 2024, as I recall. The language that the legislature had put into the budget law that year was very restrictive. It said that the money that we're talking about here shall only be spent on IC. It cannot be moved into other projects. These other projects that you mentioned, the dyslexia handbook, some of the other projects that they worked on, these were all initiatives the legislature had signed off on, but they did not allow this money from this budget law to go into those programs. It was limited only to spending on IC.
Okay, so we've heard about IC, but I think a lot of folks probably don't understand how it functions. So can you explain what this data system is supposed to do and why has upgrading it been such a priority?
Yeah, I'll try to simplify it because, but it's really important. I mean, when we talk about a data system, I know people's eyes glaze over on this. So the Idaho System for Educational Excellence has been this data bank that the state has maintained for K-12 for over a decade. It was started basically after the Great Recession. And it's supposed to be a receptacle that collects student data, school data, and collects it and maintains it and allows comparisons over time. But what it has done over the years has basically become, it's never lived up to what the state hoped it would be. It's not interactive. It's not a data system that parents could go to or legislators could go to find out how schools are performing. Uh, it's kind of a the data goes in and it lands in
Hmm.
IC, and from there it's a little bit harder to get it out. So it's never really performed that kind of a function that similar systems in other states have been able to perform. So that's why it's such a high priority. If you talk to the governor, if you talk to the members of the state board, if you talk to key legislators, they'll say, we need access to this data, and we need access to this data in a way that makes sense so that we can look at it and we can try to draw some conclusions and try to make some policy decisions that are driven by data, as opposed to policy decisions that maybe are driven by instinct or ideology. So it's really important. It's really important to education leaders. And I think by extension, it's important to parents. I think it's important to taxpayers to have a system that, you know, everyday citizens could go on to and, look at some data and try to check and see how they think the schools are doing.
Hmm. So, Kevin, federal officials pulled back more than $8 million earlier this year. How does that uh, play into this project of upgrading IC?
It's basically brought the project to a standstill. So the whole premise of upgrading IC and the whole plan for upgrading IC goes back to the pandemic. The governor and legislature agreed on the idea of using pandemic aid to fund the IC upgrade. It was, the state was awash in pandemic aid coming
Hmm.
from the feds, including pandemic aid that was earmarked for education. So the IC upgrade became one of the projects that Governor Little wanted to use pandemic aid funding for. Um, Without the money from the pandemic, there really is no funding source to continue the IC project. So what happened earlier this year was the feds said, your time's up basically on spending this money. We're going to pull it back, pulled back $8 million plus. State board doesn't have $8 million to spend on keeping this project going. So right now the upgrade is at a standstill.
Okay, so um, I want to talk a little bit more about when JFAC got this report because Representative Wendy Horman, as you reported, said, and I'm quoting, there likely will be an audit. So, what's driving lawmakers' desire for deeper insight here, Kevin? Is it just about misspending, or is there something else going on?
I think it's a bigger thing than just this instance. I think you've got a legislature in general and JFAC in particular that really wants to have more control, more oversight, more of a sense of how money is being spent. I think members of JFAC don't want to simply be seen as an ATM here, where they provide
Mm,
funding for state agencies and walk away from it. This is a committee that I think has become a lot more has really kind of embraced and tried to carve out an oversight role. So I think what you've got going on here, I see, is definitely an example of why this committee wants to have a better handle on how money is being spent. But there's a lot more at play here than just this project and just this $1.8 million, significant as that may be.
hmm. So, Kevin, the report did make clear that this misspending does predate Jennifer White's arrival as the new executive director for the State Board of Education. So, I'm curious about what her response was when this was revealed to JFAC members.
I think her response was pretty forthright in the sense that she said, "Look, this money went into other projects that you have approved in the past, but it shouldn't have, and it won't happen again." Um, Wendy Horman, the co-chair of the Budget Committee, went out of her way in that committee hearing to say, this is not Jennifer White's doing here. This is a problem that she's inherited because she just took over that job in April. Um, so I think you know, you've got the Budget Committee saying this is not Jennifer White's fault, but it is her job now, several months into the position as executive director of the state board to get this thing fixed.
Hmm. So, Kevin, we've talked about this on the program before, and that is the fact that Idaho is heading into a tight budget year. I mean, we have a budget shortfall. So, JFAC is already talking very openly about having to make cuts because we are constitutionally supposed to have a balanced budget. So, how might this almost $2 million issue shape, the broader budget debates in the legislature when the session begins next month in January?
I think it gives legislators, not just on JFAC, but starting on JFAC, because they are the committee that writes the budget bills. I think it gives them a impetus not just to sharpen their pencils about how much money is being spent and where, but also sharpen the scrutiny that they focus on, that they direct at state agencies to check to see if the money is being spent as intended, if it's going into areas that have been approved. I think this comes at a time where, with money scarce, you're going to have a lot more scrutiny over how that money is being spent.
Hmm. So, Kevin, does this conflict highlight maybe a deeper power struggle, like between budget committees and policy committees in the legislature? I mean, or is this simply about tightening procedures? Because I'm wondering if JFAC might feel as if, state agencies have been kind of loosey-goosey with their spending.
I think there's a couple of power struggles to watch as this goes forward. I think it's definitely a push and pull between the legislature and the executive branch and the state agencies that fall under the executive branch. I think this legislature is wanting to exert more influence over how money is spent, where it is spent, not just simply providing a pot of money and leaving it to the agencies to spend it. So you've got that separation of powers issue going on, and there's also some push and pull within the legislature itself. JFAC is the budget committee. They are charged with writing agency budgets and carving up the money that goes out. But at the same time, you have committees at the State House, like the education committees, the House and Senate education committees, who want to exert more control over education policy. And those committees tend to be in conflict sometimes. The policy committees, like the education committees, may feel like the budget committee is overstepping its bounds by trying to write too much policy into the budget bills. So there's a lot of conflict within the legislature, in addition to the separation of powers conflict that you would expect between the legislative and executive branches.
Okay, so last question, Kevin, and let's talk big picture here. I mean, we've already talked about the fact that there's been years of delays, millions of dollars spent on trying to upgrade ICE. Is there any confidence that the state will eventually get a functioning modern student data system? I mean, because as you said, this is about making data-driven decisions, which are critically important when it comes in particular to K through 12 education.
Eventually is kind of the key word, and that's a really subjective word, right?
Right.
Eventually, something will probably happen. I think there's too many important people at the State House who really want to see something done here. Legislators, the governor, the State Board of Education. I think is generally in agreement that this system is too old. It hasn't really lived up to its promise. We got to do something about it, and we probably should have done something about it a while ago. But eventually does not mean immediately. I would be really surprised to see any kind of movement in terms of solving the IC problem this next legislative session, because there just isn't any money. I mean, even in a good year, I think it would be difficult to come up with several $1 million to put into a data system. It's just not it's not very sexy. It's not one of those kind of education projects that people get really excited about doing, even though it's an important project. So Even in a good year, this would be a tough sell, but this is a really tough year. So I think it's an even harder sell. So again, I would be really surprised to see any major movement this next legislative session in terms of trying to get this IC project back off of the ground.
All right. Well, Kevin, really appreciate your time today. We've been talking with Kevin Richert, senior reporter with Idaho Education News, discussing a report showing that the State Board of Education misspent nearly $2 million and how legislators are moving forward. Of course, you can catch all of Kevin's reporting on this on Idaho Education News website. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh wide and drift.
Gemma, isn't that a song from one of my very favorite Peanut specials?
Yeah, George, it is. It's from a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. Now, remember, this is where the gang takes a trip to have Thanksgiving dinner with Charlie's grandma.
It's a lot like so many folks in Idaho who travel to see family during Thanksgiving or the Christmas holiday.
So, George, if you're traveling this holiday season around Idaho, keep your eyes open for possible stories for our Idaho 44 series.
That's right. You're gathering stories from all of Idaho's 44 counties.
Just remember, folks, if you're traveling over the holidays and maybe you see a story idea somewhere, send us a quick email. Just go to idahomatters@boisestate.edu.
And can it be any kind of story?
It can be anything.
So cool. Can I tell you, I just love Charlie Brown.
I mean, who doesn't, George?
Over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh wide and drifting snow. Over the river and through the woods, oh how the wind does blow. It stings the toes and bites the nose. Over the ground we